Hi, this is NBoyce, and this is my personal best leadership project. Believe it or not, that is a fireplace in the background, but that's what you get for living in McCall. So cozy little morning this morning, a little chilly outside, but sure feels good. So let's go ahead and jump right in. So the goals of my project were to be in a leadership role with a focus on inspiring a shared vision and enabling others to act, which were the two areas in my SLPI assessment that were lower. So I wanted to focus specifically in these two areas, and get out of my comfort zone was also a main thing. So I wanted to do something new, and I wanted to change something up and do something new so that it gave myself an opportunity to learn new things and to get more comfortable in certain leadership roles. So the last but not least is I wanted to incorporate all 5 leadership practices in some way. And my goal was to be mindful of my actions and purposeful in my communication. So mindful of my actions. Every day I made a goal and I asked myself, what leadership practice was I going to focus on today? I asked myself, was it going to be challenge the process, model the way, inspire a shared vision, encourage the heart? What did I want to focus on, and what actions were I going to take to make that happen? So I made a plan each day and was very mindful in my actions. So my starting point was I initially met with family advocates, and I talked to them about taking the lead in gathering CASA bios. So CASA stands for Court Appointed Special Advocate, and there's 141 CASAs in Ada County. So the goal was to get all of the CASA bios and put those together, a little synopsis of each one for family advocates. Unfortunately, it didn't end up working out. I had some struggles, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But my milestones that I had set out in my outline were to meet with family advocates and gather contact information, create bio questions with direction from family advocates, design a layout or a template for the CASA bios, and then email all 141 CASAs requesting their bios. And then I also was planning to send out a sample bio for the reference, and then follow up with emails for those that hadn't yet turned in their bio. And last but not least is I was not planning on taking over this entire project. That's a lot to handle, I think, for one person, and this would be very time consuming. So I was going to assign or seek another person to handle the CASA bios once my milestones were completed. So once my portion of the job was completed, my goal was to send that off to somebody else, and family advocates was going to help with that. Another volunteer. Well, as I mentioned, things did not work out, so I had to change things up. And no, this is not me. This is not a picture of me, but I was sad. And that's really because I had too many cancellations from my point of contact. So I was working with the point of contact at Family Advocates, and one thing led to another. And then being in McCall, I had to meet with her down in Ada County, but back and forth between McCall and Boise, it just ended up not working out. So our schedules did not work out, and after the third time I got canceled on, I just said, you know, it's just too tight of a deadline to risk another cancellation. So I moved on and I changed up my project, and we'll get into that. So what did I end up doing? My new idea was to MC an event and lead volleyball. And I did this for a summer camp, a sports and arts camp. And it was a 3-day event in the evenings. And then we also had one Sunday bonus camp for families. So this was led through my church, and the age groups were 5 to 11. And so again, 2 things. I led volleyball. I had 2 helpers each night, one assistant coach, and then another setup person. And it also required meeting with the pastor and other leaders beforehand to discuss logistics. We also went over safety rules, do's and don'ts of leaders, and I met with helpers to communicate vision, and that was my vision. So I was the leader for volleyball, and then I had another assistant coach, as I mentioned. So I would go over my plan that I had put together for each age groups. It was split up by ages, so we didn't have all of the same age group each night, but you know, we're going to do something different for 4th and 5th graders than we would for kindergartners. So I met with her and I talked to her about my vision and what I wanted to do each night. And then I also got her input, because I think that's a good leadership thing to do, as we've learned, to get her input of how we can change things up and what we can do differently. Kind of goes along with challenging the process as well, being innovative. And then I was the MC for the event. I planned a script each night with my co-host, which was also my brother-in-law, Matt, and I had to get into character and make it fun. So every year that we do this camp, and I haven't done this camp yet, but every year my church has done this camp, there's a different MC. So Matty Buckets is the name of my brother-in-law's character, and he's the one that's consistent. And then they have a new MC come in and create a new character and make it fun for the kids. So I will show you what I ended up doing for that. So what did I do? This is my character right here. This is Coach Nick is who I was. And this is also, believe it or not, me right here in those ridiculously high shorts. So I created this character with the inspiration of my brother-in-law. I've coached volleyball for several years, and we wanted the character to be fun and goofy because we wanted to let the kids know it's okay to be themselves. Nobody's going to be perfect, and that's okay. So we can do something ridiculous, we can be silly, but really we just be ourselves and have fun. And that's exactly what we did. So as I mentioned, I wore ridiculously awkward high shorts and this funny wig. And then I had a ton of energy. I was positive and encouraging with the children. So working with Maddie B, as I mentioned, I was the MC. So same thing with the Coach Nick. And as the MC, Maddie Buckets and I had to create a skit each night, and we had to create a unified vision matching the theme of the camp. So the theme of the camp was Made for More, or Made for This was the title of the camp. And the thought is that God has made us with a purpose, and we're made to grow, we're made for a big life, and we're made for more. So Made for More was the overall theme that we had to create a vision for. And then Made to Grow, Made for a Big Life were the two other, I guess, subcategories, if you will. So those are things that we wanted to incorporate into our message each night. And so this is the exact definition of inspiring a shared vision, is exactly what we did. We focused on imagining possibilities, new possibilities. We talked about their future and the person they can be, the leader that they can be, a servant leader in following God. We focused on shared aspirations, and really it comes down to, and I'm sure for anyone who's ever been to church before, is we all want to be our best selves, and we want to feel loved and valued, and God can provide that. So we would create a skit to really focus on these areas and let the kids know that God's always going to be there for them. It's going to be the one constant. He's reliable. They can trust. You can trust him. Building relationships with him is what's going to lead to growth and a big life, and that they all have an individual purpose that they are called for. And that was our shared vision we inspired. So how did I model the way? I modeled the way by listening to the speaker and pastor in groups. And this was a key thing. This is one thing that actually we all talked about in the very beginning as leaders, is how can we be model examples to these children? So ages 5 to 11, very impressionable. And they're always watching you, no matter what. So we didn't want there to be a different power dynamic. And this is one thing that I know the text had mentioned, which really stood out to me. And I didn't want there to be an individual power difference. I didn't want me to be up here and them down here. So I made a point to sit with them in groups. So there was probably about 100 kids, and each night the pastor and then a guest speaker would give a speech. And so I sat down with them in the grass and listened. I listened intently. I had my hands in my lap, and I listened to the speaker. I made eye contact, and I was full on focused on what he and she had to say, because I knew that the children around me were watching me. They looked up to me. I was their leader. I had coached them in volleyball, and I knew that they would be watching. So I made a point to model the way in that sense. So I sat quietly with the children, and then I showed off my volleyball skills. I will tell you, model the way. At the beginning of each one of our little segments for the night, I would hit a volleyball or spike it or show them how to set it, or pass it, whatever the case may be, because I wanted them to know that I started at their point. I actually started playing volleyball at a very young age, and so I wanted them to know they're not alone, and eventually they can get to be a good volleyball player like myself. So, share my values as Coach Nick. My values were really kind of along the lines of inspiring a shared vision. So I wanted them to know that I did believe in God, and that I do believe in God, and that this is an important thing to me, and then I want them to know that they are made for a bigger life, and that they're made to grow, and they will get there with a relationship with God. And I was constantly positive, and I led with a smile. So this is a picture of me doing just this. And how did I challenge the process? So as I mentioned, I wanted to incorporate those other two areas. So we're going to dive into those other two leadership practices. I challenged the process by being innovative. One of the nights there was some miscommunication between myself, the other MC, and the guest speaker. And so we had to change things up. We had to change our message. We had to change our skit for the following day, and then also that day to make sure that we were meeting all of our objectives and our goals in the very beginning. And this required experimenting and taking risks. So challenging the process, I challenged the process from day one with creating this character in the first place. I was definitely out of my comfort zone, to say the least. I think I'm definitely presenting myself in a fun, upbeat way, but when I have a lot of people and all eyes on me, I have a hard time being dorky or being silly, and that's exactly what I had to do. And there was a lot more parents that showed up to this than I expected, so kind of embarrassing a little bit, but the kids had fun and they enjoyed my character, so I was willing to take risks and experiment to do what I needed to in order to meet those goals. Coaching and leading volleyball. So the two areas, the two leadership practices that I focused on was, number one, enabling others to act. And I would enable others to act through building relationships and empowering the children and the assistant leader. So I had my vision, as I mentioned, and I talked to the leader about what I wanted to do, my goals, and the program that I had set up for each individual age group. But I wanted to empower her because she's actually I shouldn't say she's never played volleyball. She has, it's just been a while. And so I wanted her to know that it's okay. You don't need to be perfect. These children are ages 5 to 7. They've never learned this skill at all before. So try your best, and it's pretty simple. I'll show you what you need to do, and be creative with it. Run with it. Have fun, and just lead with a smile, and you'll do what you need to do. And I wanted to empower the children by telling them they're not going to be perfect. That's okay, but I gave them the skills that they needed to in order to be successful, because I wanted to develop competence and confidence in them. So any child with trying something new, it is tough. It's tough for them to get outside of their comfort zone, and it's hard to deal with that failure, if you will, because they're going to try something new and they're not going to be perfect at it. So, but I wanted them to know that's okay and that's normal. And I also wanted them to know to look around. All the other children are in the same boat. They're all failing. So not to get discouraged, and I modeled the way by staying positive and being encouraging. And I taught them the skills that they needed to in order to kind of build that confidence up. And encourage the heart. I showed appreciation for being good listeners. That's such a small thing, but when you have children that are, kindergarten, first grade, being a good listener is an easy way to provide recognition, but also show appreciation. I wanted them to give them credit for doing something and have it not be only volleyball related. So yes, I would recognize when a child did something, they would make a good pass or a good hit or a good serve. Of course I wanted to recognize that, because that's why we're here. But I also wanted to notice the ones that were doing something right even though they might not realize it. And that's being a good listener. It's a very, very small thing, but I think it definitely made a difference. And recognizing individual players by name when they did something well. Recognizing someone by name is the key here in building that relationship. Celebrated victories in games and created a spirit of community. Again, telling them we're all on the same team, and we would celebrate victories. So at the very end of each camp, each day, we would do a little scrimmage, if you will. And we had some games, and it was a volleyball game, but also it was something as simple as throwing the ball over the net, and for the younger kids, just catching the volleyball, and that was a success. And I wanted to create those small victories so they had more opportunities to do well. And that's exactly what happened. I think it worked out very well. So how did I meet my goals? Well, I did incorporate all 5 leadership practices in some way. I was mindful of my actions and purposeful in my communication. As I mentioned in the beginning of each day, I would say, what area am I going to focus on? What leadership practice did I want to focus on most? They were most certainly inspiring a shared vision and enabling others act were the 2 areas that I wanted to improve most. And so I was mindful of my actions and asked myself, how can I achieve this goal? And what did I need to do to make that happen? And then also incorporating the other 3 as I mentioned. And I definitely got out of my comfort zone and tried new things. I was innovative, I challenged the process, I encouraged the heart, and I led by example in modeling the way. Overall, I feel great. I definitely think I learned a lot from this project, and I think overall it went really well. So that brings me to, what did I learn? I learned that even the smallest actions can have a huge impact. Taking the time to build relationships and ask genuine, meaningful questions goes a long way. I haven't mentioned this yet, but I made a point to ask meaningful questions when I was trying to build relationships and build trust with players. I would try to ask things more than just, what's your favorite subject in school? I would ask things like, what are you passionate about? What makes you you? And it was fun to see how children would just light up when you took interest in them and took a genuine interest in by asking meaningful questions and being a good listener. And I also learned that leaders are always being watched, even when they don't think they are. I know this when working with children, that they're always watching, so that we need to be mindful of our nonverbal language, as well as what we say to someone else in passing, because they're always watching and they're looking up to you. So you need to be the best leader you can be all the time. I also learned that simple recognition and appreciation builds trust. The simple thanks goes a long way. The simple recognition of saying someone's name and noticing that they did something well goes a long way. And then lastly, we have the opportunity to lead even when we are not in a leadership position. So this to me is probably the number one thing that I've learned this semester, is that we don't need to be in a leadership role to be a leader, especially with reading the text and all the individual examples of employees that were leaders by standing up for what they believe in and speaking up in meetings. That really hit home to me. And I realized that I am a leader, and we are all leaders, even just in our everyday lives. We're leaders by, even when we're just at the grocery store and we're checking out. We're leaders by recognizing the person checking out our groceries, calling them by name, asking them positive questions. We're being a leader in life and showing that positivity, encouraging the heart, modeling the way are important, and that we have the opportunity to do this every day, all the time. So definitely am mindful of that. That is all I have. Thank you so much for watching, and thanks for a great semester.